The first red flag wasn't the calendar invite titled Transition, Planning Meeting Mandatory Attendance. It was the fact that it came from Brenda in HR, a woman who once described her own divorce as a synergy realignment. I knew something reeked the moment I stepped into that sterile conference room with the two bright LEDs and a pitcher of water sweating like it knew what was coming. Tom was already there, pretending to look busy on his iPad, probably playing Sudoku while trying to look like he understood how firewalls worked. I built that system, my system, from the first insecure Wi-Fi router all the way to the biometric lock on our private server room. I gave it teeth, claws, and manners. It was lean, mean, unhackable by anyone who didn't have my specific paranoia. And yet here I was, being told my role was no longer aligned with the company's forward-facing strategy. Translation, they wanted someone younger, cheaper, and dumber who wouldn't ask why Brenda still printed out her emails. Tom leaned back in his chair like he was about to pitch a TED talk on betrayal. Jessica, he said with that smirk that made me want to install a malware worm on his toothbrush, we're reimagining the architecture of our internal operations. He said it like I hadn't been the architecture. Brenda, sitting next to him in her oatmeal-colored power blazer, nodded like one of those dashboard dogs. We really value your contributions, she said, but it's time for us to pivot. Pivot my ass. They were shoving me off a cliff and calling it Career Parker. And look, I know how these things go. There's always some poor bastard who gets downsized, while upper management gives themselves back-padding bonuses for streamlining. I just never thought I'd be the one holding the severance packet. I'd eaten lunch at my desk for 6 years, missed my sister's wedding to troubleshoot a database crash, and even patched a 0-day exploit during a kidney infection. But I didn't cry. I didn't rage, I smiled. Not because I was okay, hell no, but because I knew something they didn't. The system didn't run on trust, it ran through me. I was the keystone. And in that moment, sitting there watching Tom adjust his designer glasses like a low-rent Bond villain, I made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to torch the place. No, I was going to lock it. They gave me 50 minutes of final access. That's 50 minutes too many if you're firing a paranoid security engineer with a memory like a vault and a petty streak a mile wide. I logged into the master admin panel, navigated to the root authentication node, and changed the one password that truly mattered. One key, one door, one lock, and then the cherry on top, I changed the password hint, not some cryptic riddle or string of nonsense. No, I made it poetic, the name of the guy you shouldn't have fired. Just vague enough to cause a panic, just specific enough to keep them guessing. And poetic justice for the man who spent years calling me kiddo in meetings while using my diagrams to impress board members. By the time I walked out of the building, box in hand, badge deactivated, and dignity trailing behind like a balloon at a kid's funeral, I felt hollow. Not angry, not even sad, just done. Burned out like a firewall catching its own spark. Also, real quick, if you're listening to this and you're not subscribed, help me out here. 97% of folks watch these but don't hit that little button. I'm trying to hit my first ever 10,000 subs. That number means I can finally stop drinking instant coffee and maybe afford a desk chair that doesn't squeak like a dying hamster. Anyway, back to the collapse. That night, I got drunk on 2 margaritas and passed out watching a documentary about sea cucumbers. I dreamed about the login screen blinking, waiting for a password it would never get. Waiting for the name of the guy. Too bad the guy was a woman, and her name was Jessica. Unemployment smells like sour coffee and half-done laundry. For 3 days, I didn't leave my apartment except to shuffle to the mailbox like a depressed cryptid. The air outside felt too functional, like the world had the audacity to keep turning while I was stuck in neutral. I lived in pajamas, listened to true crime podcasts like they were gospel, and told myself I was decompressing. Truth was, I was stewing, simmering like a slow cooker filled with unspoken rage and leftover pad thai. Every now and then, I'd glance at my laptop screen lighting up with LinkedIn notifications. Congrats on the new opportunity, Jessica. The algorithm chirped like a chipper cult member. Only I didn't have a new opportunity. What I did have was an alert showing a new job posting from my former company. Same responsibilities, same requirements, same damn bullet points I wrote myself 2 years ago just under a new name, Cloud Infrastructure Support Specialist. A fancy title duct-taped over my corpse. I didn't apply, I didn't even rage post, I watched. Then came the first email. Subject line, quick favor server credentials, sender Tom Smugface Ralston. My hands twitched before I even opened it. There it was, an innocuous little question wrapped in assumed entitlement. Hey Jessica, if you're doing well, lie. Quick Q, do you happen to remember the login for the legacy archive server? We're trying to pull some client data for Q4 projections. Should be an easy grab. Easy grab, huh? See, that server, nicknamed the Dungeon by me and the late-night sysadmin crew, held 10 years of quarterly backups, compliance logs, and audit trails. Not glamorous, but if you lost access, good luck explaining it to the IRS. And the credentials, well, let's just say I built that server's login sequence like a jealous god. It required a rotating password based on a script I wrote using Julian calendar offsets. Not impossible to access, but good luck if you don't know where the script lives. Hint, not on their network. I stared at Tom's email. Thought about all the times he'd forwarded my work to clients without credit. Thought about how he once called me the help at a holiday party, laughing into his gin and tonic like he was auditioning for a reboot of Mad Men. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, "Hi Tom, I believe all credentials were transitioned to the IT department per my offboarding checklist. Let me know if you need help locating it in your files. Best, Jessica." Polite, professional, pointed, like smiling while tightening a noose. I hit send and stared at the screen. That tiny act of defiance lit something in me, a flicker. Control, not just over them, but over the narrative, over myself. Because for the first time since the firing, I wasn't just reacting, I was directing the fallout. They thought I'd vanish quietly. They thought I'd slink away, polish my resume, and go rebuild my life somewhere else like a good little tech drone. But they forgot something vital. I built the damn fortress. I knew every corner, every creak in the walls, every back door because I designed them. And they just locked themselves inside. Without the architect. Day 7 was when the cracks stopped being metaphorical. I was halfway through a bowl of discount mac and cheese, watching some YouTube video on how to rewire your brain for success hosted by a man who looked like he hadn't blinked since 2014 when my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail because screw that. I wasn't about to break my streak of not speaking to another human for 4 straight days. 30 seconds later, the voicemail popped up. Tom's voice. But not the one I knew, the smooth, fake confidence TED talk Tom. This was a different creature entirely. This was sweaty Tom. Shaky breath, sentence fragments, the sound of someone slamming a desk drawer mid-sentence. "Hey Jessica, ooh, listen, really need your help here. We're having trouble accessing the admin console for Ops Sync. I know you left things buttoned up and all, just wondering if you might remember the password off the top of your head. No big deal, just shoot me a message if you do. Appreciate it. Really, Ops Sync, that wasn't just any system, that was the spine. The thing that controlled vendor API access, transaction batching, remote logging, and yes, the payroll funnel. I hadn't touched the Ops Sync password since the week I finished implementing the 2FA token sequence hard-coded to their internal clock, which, last I checked, hadn't been synced to UTC properly since 2019. I played the voicemail twice, then 3 more times, just to hear the fear bloom in his throat. Then I laughed so hard I dropped my plastic fork into the mac and cheese like a javelin. 5 minutes later came an email. Not from Tom. Brenda, queen of HR formalities. A woman who once told me enthusiasm is no substitute for compliance when I tried to implement Slack. Subject, friendly reminder, NDA terms and cooperation expectations. Hi Jessica, I hope you're doing well post-transition. We've recently encountered some minor technical difficulties and would greatly appreciate any information you might recall related to password credentials. Of course, we want to gently remind you that per the non-disclosure and non-compete agreements you signed on date, any engagement with external parties or use of privileged knowledge must remain within the legal bounds outlined. Let us know if you'd like to schedule a brief call. Warmly, Brenda warmly. From a woman who once corrected my posture during a fire drill. I didn't reply to her. Instead, I opened a fresh email to Tom. Feigned concern. Typed slowly, savoring every keystroke. "Hi Tom, I'm afraid I can't recall the exact password you're referencing. It's been a minute, but I always set a hint to jog my memory. You should be able to see it on the master login screen. Hope that helps. Best, Jessica." I hit send, then I sat back and let the silence stretch. Because that was the moment the trap snapped shut. They would see the hint. They would panic. They would assume, because of course they would, that the name of the guy you shouldn't have fired referred to someone else. Anyone else. Dave from accounting, maybe? Greg, the guy who used to manage vendor relations before he got canned for trying to expense strip club receipts as client engagement. But not me, not Jessica, because in their minds I was nobody, a background process, an extra in their little corporate play, and that was their fatal flaw. They forgot I wasn't a line item. I was the root user, and the system, my system, only answered to me. Maria called me from her car during her lunch break, engine running, Bluetooth crackling like it was coughing up secrets. Her voice had that breathless urgency people get when they know they shouldn't be telling you something but can't help themselves. "Jessica, I swear to God, it's a zoo in here." She hadn't even said hello. I paused my walk around the park, my one act of daily productivity, and leaned against a tree like some suburban cryptid waiting for gossip. "They've completely lost it," she said, laughing between words like she was trying to exercise it. "You remember that password hint you left behind? The name of the guy you shouldn't have fired? Yeah, you broke them." I smiled so hard my face hurt. "How bad is it? Oh, honey." She took a breath like she was about to tell me someone died. "They're calling it an internal security breach. Should have seen the meeting yesterday." Tom had a whiteboard out. "A whiteboard, Jessica?" Like he was solving the Zodiac murders. Now, understand, Maria doesn't exaggerate. She's the kind of woman who organizes her pantry by expiry date and once built a backup spreadsheet for the department's vacation calendar just in case. So when she told me that my former team was currently entrenched in a full-blown witch hunt trying to decode the riddle of my parting shot, I knew it was real. They've convinced themselves it was Dave from accounting, she said. I blinked. Dave? Didn't he get let go 6 months ago for doing actual accounting fraud? Yup. Apparently that's now your fault too. Brenda said something about pattern recognition and how Dave never really let go of his resentment. Like, what does that even mean? I could practically feel the beige conference room in my bones, the LED lights, the scent of cold Subway sandwiches, and the flop sweat of middle managers trying to project confidence while circling the drain. Maria continued. Stephen from marketing was a suspect too, because he once threw a stapler after being passed up for promotion. But then Tom said, and I quote, Stephen couldn't hack his way out of a Google form, which, fair. Let me guess, I said. Nobody mentioned me? Silence. Then a dry chuckle. Nope, you're not even on the suspect list. I think Tom said something like Jessica? No, she's too logical for something like this. That stopped me cold, not because it hurt, but because it was so perfectly in character. Tom had never really seen me, not once in 6 years. I wasn't a person to him, I was a function. A fire extinguisher with a Wi-Fi card. Useful in emergencies, invisible the rest of the time. God, Maria said, lowering her voice. The best part. Had a strategy meeting this morning and printed out a list of every guy they've fired in the past 5 years. 5 years. Brenda actually said, let's cross-reference this with who had a grudge and access to admin credentials. I nearly dropped my phone from laughing. Please tell me they've created a color-coded spreadsheet. Oh, they have. Tom's using red for high-risk male actors. I wheezed. Maria sighed, the sound of someone watching a house burn down while roasting a marshmallow. Honestly, it's the only reason I haven't rage quit yet. Watching them melt down over this is better than HBO. We hung up with her promising to call me the moment the grudge board went digital. I stood there under the tree, letting the wind blow through my hoodie, feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Power. Not petty power, not revenge-flavored satisfaction. Just the deep, cosmic serenity that comes from watching people dig the wrong hole with the wrong shovel in the wrong yard, while you sip your overpriced coffee and wonder if they'll ever notice the map was upside down the whole time. They were chasing ghosts while the ghost was alive and well. And smirking. By the time they brought in the consultants, I was already on my second bag of kettle corn and third rerun of forensic files. There's a specific kind of pleasure in knowing the house you built is still standing, but the idiots inside can't figure out how the damn doorknob works. Maria had texted me 2 words, they're here, along with a blurry photo snapped through a half-closed break room door. It showed 3 guys in matching polos, all with Bluetooth headsets and laptop stickers that said things like hack the planet and trust me, I'm root. Their company? Something obnoxious, Signex Secure Tech Solutions, the kind of firm that charges $800 an hour to Google your problem and mispronounce Linux. I knew the type. They weren't there to fix anything. They were there to look like they were fixing something. To collect a paycheck, drink free Office La Croix, and ultimately tell the VP of IT that the system was too legacy and needed a full rebuild. Which, ironically, was true, except I was the legacy. The next morning, Maria called me whispering into the phone like she was leaking top-secret intel. Jessica, they tried running a penetration test on the ops sync node and accidentally tripped the failsafe. The system locked them out entirely. I grinned so wide my cheeks hurt. The failsafe was a dirty little trick I'd never told anyone about. One too many failed login attempts triggered a sandbox lockdown that required a biometric reauth with admin override. In English, they weren't getting in unless they found my left thumb attached to a living body. But wait, she added, they charged $23,000 for the attempt. I actually clapped. That afternoon, Tom got chewed out so hard by the VP that his Fitbit registered it as a cardiac event. I didn't hear this from Maria. I heard it directly because my phone rang again, and this time the caller ID didn't say unknown. It said, K. Wexler VP Operations. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds before answering. Jessica speaking. A long pause, then a voice like cold metal. This is Karen Wexler. I'm the VP overseeing IT ops at Trionix. I understand you were let go under Tom Ralston's restructuring plan. Under cute. Yes, I said evenly. That's correct. Then I'll be blunt. We're in a difficult position and I have no time for games. We'd appreciate your cooperation in restoring access to key infrastructure. Frankly, this situation is starting to resemble a case of deliberate obstruction. I raised an eyebrow, even though she couldn't see it. I'm sorry to hear that. I completed a full offboarding checklist, which included documentation and credential handoff. If the internal team lost that documentation, I'm not sure how that's my responsibility. Let me put it another way, she said, voice tightening. You created a proprietary system. You were the sole admin. There is no access now. That's a liability. If this were to escalate, I cut her off, voice calm, razor-edged. If you're implying legal action, I'd suggest reviewing Company Policy Section 8.3. Departing employees are required to secure administrative-level systems to prevent unauthorized future access. That's exactly what I did. Dead silence. I continued, blood turning colder with every syllable. If your staff misunderstood the password hint, I left. I can't help that. I didn't name anyone. I didn't restrict access maliciously. I simply locked a door I was told to walk away from, a long exhale on her end, calculating, then reluctantly, you're not denying you have access. I'm not confirming anything either. Another pause, then we'll be in touch. Click. I stared at the phone for a minute after she hung up. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. I wasn't scared. I was crystallized. Anger had passed. So had the heartbreak. I was something harder now, sharper. They didn't just let me go. They didn't just forget me. They fired the one person who knew the blueprint, threw out the manual, then screamed at the machine when it refused to obey. They didn't just fire an employee. They discarded the key. It was Maria's idea to plant the seed. Well, she whispered over the phone one night, they're basically hemorrhaging at this point. I could accidentally mention your name in the next crisis meeting. See if it gets any traction. I took a sip of boxed wine and smiled at my laptop screen like it owed me rent. Make it sound organic, I said, like you just remembered I exist. Already did. They looked like someone farted in a server rack. Turns out desperation has a scent, and it's corporate lavender with top notes of flop, sweat, and shame. By Friday, I got the email. It wasn't from Tom. Not even Brenda. No, this one came from someone named Harper in Procurement Solutions Liaison or some other made-up department name that screamed buffer zone. Subject line: exploring potential contracted assistance, time-sensitive. You know what that means. They didn't want to admit defeat. They wanted to frame it like a collaboration. The body was full of legalese salad. After internal deliberations, we're considering bringing on an external expert to temporarily consult on legacy infrastructure reentry protocols. Legacy infrastructure. That was me now. I was a human antique. I waited 6 hours before responding. Just enough to make them sweat, not enough to make them think I was desperate. Then I replied, "Hi Harper, thank you for reaching out. I'd be happy to consider assisting your team in a consulting capacity. Attached is a draft engagement agreement for review. Terms include hourly rate, $1,100 minimum block, 5 hours payment, upfront via wire transfer deliverables, recovery of access to administrative systems as defined by client scope, additional requirement, a written acknowledgement of my contributions to the company's security infrastructure, and an apology for how my exit was handled. I am available to begin once payment and documentation are received. Best. Jessica." I attached the contract. It was clean, ironclad, and bulletproof. My lawyer, because yes, I had one now, helped draft it with the precision of a military drone strike. There were clauses in there that would make Brenda's veins pulsate. Clause 14, no consultant tasks will commence until the above terms are executed in full without amendment. Clause 17, all communication attempts post-contract shall be in writing. Translation, pay me, apologize, and shut up. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Then, 24 hours later, Maria texted me one sentence. Tom said, and I quote, "She's extorting us." I almost choked on my cereal. I hadn't extorted anyone. I'd offered a service at market value. It's not my fault their market is a flaming garbage heap full of half-trained consultants and confused interns. But the cherry on top, they declined. They said my offer was outrageously hostile and out of alignment with company values. I think Tom even floated the phrase toxic femininity in a meeting, which, God help him, Maria says was met with dead silence from the entire legal department. So, in their infinite wisdom, they decided to brute force it. Maria called me 3 hours later from her car. They brought in another guy. New vendor. Guy's like 20. Showed up with a gaming laptop and said he's a freelance penetration specialist. I barked out a laugh. Is he trying to seduce the firewall? No, but he tried to boot into the secure shell using Kali Linux on a flash drive. The mainframe rejected the connection, and now there's a full-blown audit lockout. Lights turned red, Jessica. Red. The conference room looked like a submarine preparing to dive. I closed my eyes and let the words wash over me like hot water in a cold shower. They could have paid me $5,000 and moved on. Instead, they chose humiliation. Again, let them scramble. Let them bleed money into consultants and tech bros who confuse HDMI ports with vulnerability exploits. They still didn't get it. You can't brute force a lock that was built by the person you're trying to ignore. They thought I'd come crawling. What I sent was an invoice. They say arrogance blinds you, but in corporate America, it also deafens you, neuters your instincts, and fills your ears with buzzwords until you can't tell a pipe bomb from a PowerPoint. So when the final brute force attempt triggered a checksum error and scrambled 3 months' worth of vendor invoices, the only thing anyone in that glass-walled hellscape could do was panic and point fingers. That's when Tyler spoke up. Tyler, a junior IT tech with a faded Zelda tattoo and the voice of a man who'd only spoken to his cat for the past 2 years. He was the guy who fixed the Wi-Fi Brenda kept blaming on solar flares. The guy who built their Jira automation from scratch and once got screamed at for attending a meeting without a blazer. In other words, invisible. But now, with invoices lost and consultants fleeing like rats from a flaming cruise ship, Tyler cleared his throat in the corner of the war room and said something so obvious it hit like a defibrillator. Not to overstep, he mumbled, eyes flicking between the managers like a nervous meerkat. But the password hint? The name of the guy you shouldn't have fired? What if it's not literal? Silence. Then a scoff, from Tom, of course. What does that even mean? Tyler pressed on. I mean, we've been assuming it was about some male employee, right? Maybe the hint isn't about a guy at all. Maybe that's just the joke, like sarcasm. Brenda blinked, slow and stunned. You're saying the person who set the password is the person we fired, but not a guy? Tyler nodded, almost apologetic. I mean, who else had root access? Who designed the system? Who was the last one in the admin panel? The air in the room shifted, a full degree colder. And then it happened, the collective. Dawning horror that bloomed across their faces like a chemical reaction. The blood drained from Tom's face so fast he looked like a freshly waxed corpse. Jessica, he whispered. The name landed like a slap. For a few beautiful seconds, nobody said anything. Then the rage began to boil. She did this, Tom snarled. She planned this. Brenda, ever the damage control bot, jumped in. We have to contain this. This could be considered a hostile act. You should review her NDA again. See if this can be classified as deliberate sabotage. Tyler wisely slinked out of the room, probably to go hyperventilate behind a server rack. Meanwhile, management sprang into action, not to fix the system, but to build a case. Maria told me later they actually tried to retroactively find policy violations in my employee file. Brenda requested all my Slack messages for tone analysis. Tom asked legal if using sarcasm in a password hint could qualify as malicious misrepresentation of intent. Spoiler, it can't. But logic wasn't the point anymore. They weren't searching for a fix. They were grasping for a villain, a scapegoat, an explanation that didn't involve admitting they'd fired the only person who understood how their castle was built. And now that they'd realized the guy in the hint wasn't Dave or Steven or some imaginary hacker in a Guy Fawkes mask, it was me, they lost what little chill they had left. The fury that had once been directed at nameless ghosts now zeroed in on Jessica, on the woman who dared to know more than them, who left with grace, locked the gates, and smiled. But they still didn't understand the worst part. I hadn't broken anything. I'd simply followed protocol, and they were about to learn how that looked in writing. The invitation came wrapped in faux politeness and legalese, like a threat dipped in vanilla frosting. Jessica, we'd appreciate your presence for a brief clarification meeting regarding your recent transition and associated administrative concerns. Translation, get your ass in here, we need someone to blame. It was scheduled for Monday at 10 o'clock a.m. in their executive conference suite, which I knew from experience smelled like burnt Keurig pods and failed ambition. I wore black. Not as a statement, just because it matched my mood and the folder I brought, thick, tabbed, and full of receipts. Literal and metaphorical. Tom was already seated when I walked in, jaw tight, eyes twitching like someone who hadn't slept in a week. Brenda was there too, her face botox smooth but her jaw clenched tight enough to snap a pencil. And then there was the company lawyer, some gray-suited meat puppet with horn-rimmed glasses and a voice like a GPS running low on battery. I sat, smiled, placed my folder gently on the table like a bomb with the pin halfway out. Jessica, the lawyer began, we appreciate you coming in. We've reviewed the circumstances around your departure and subsequent system access issues. There are some concerns, serious concerns, that your actions may constitute willful obstruction of company operations. Tom jumped in, voice brittle. You sabotaged us. You planted a lock and refused to cooperate. I tilted my head like I was trying to hear better. You mean the system lockdown that occurred after you brought in outside parties, who triggered a failsafe, I specifically documented in your admin onboarding packet? Brenda flinched. The lawyer cleared his throat. We're simply exploring whether your post-departure conduct aligns with your non-disclosure and non-compete clauses. We're also reviewing if any damages to internal systems could be traced back to decisions made during your tenure. I reached into my folder and pulled out 3 pages, slid them across the table. Here are copies of my last 3 annual performance evaluations, all signed by Tom. You'll notice phrases like mission critical, indispensable, and my personal favorite, security infrastructure visionary. Tom looked like he wanted to die. Next, I pulled out a printout of the company policy, section 8.3 under employee offboarding protocol. I read it aloud. All administrative-level employees must ensure that all systems, credentials, and access points are secured and transitioned per checklist. In the absence of a designated replacement, full lockdown is advised. I looked up. I followed procedure. There was no replacement. I secured the system. That's not sabotage. That's compliance. Brenda opened her mouth. I didn't let her. As for the password hint, I flipped to another tab. That was my standard practice. Cognitive tools to aid memory retrieval. I once set a hint that said, "What's that smell?" for a server called Moldy Cheddar. I have dozens of these. I leaned forward, just enough to make them uncomfortable. It's not my fault you couldn't solve a riddle that was never meant to be malicious. That's not obstruction. That's your failure to understand your own infrastructure. Lawyer stared at the papers, mouth set in a thin line. Then he asked with a trace of hesitation, do you still have access? I gave a small, cool smile. Not unless I'm retained. You declined my contract. Tom exploded. You're holding the company hostage, I shrugged. If you fired your locksmith and lost the keys, is it their fault the doors won't open? Silence. Then the lawyer sighed, a deep, weary sound that said we're not winning this. Because he wasn't stupid. Could already see the headlines. Fired engineer blamed for IT collapse. She was paid to prevent company ignored security warnings. Blames woman who built the system. This wasn't just a PR nightmare. It was an open casket. Brenda broke the silence with a tight smile. Let's revisit the consultant contract. Perhaps there's room for flexibility. I stacked my papers and stood. There isn't, and I walked out. The wire hit my account at 9:07 a.m. sharp. I watched it roll in with a smile that felt like a scar healing in real time, clean, sharp, and permanent. $5,500, upfront, just to walk in the door. The contract had been signed the night before. Not negotiated, accepted. Every term, every clause, every requirement, including the part that made Brenda's lips curl when she read it out loud. A formal written apology, acknowledging the mishandling of termination and the consultant's critical contributions to infrastructure security. I printed it out on thick ivory paper and folded it carefully into my bag. When I walked into the building that morning, you could hear a pin drop. I passed the receptionist, new girl, didn't know who I was, and stepped into the belly of the beast like I was returning from the dead. No one said a word. Staff paused at their desks. Heads turned, eyes widened. A few jaws dropped. I kept walking. Maria caught my eye through a glass divider and mouthed, "Holy shit." I gave her the faintest nod and kept going, my boots clicking like gunshots down the hallway. Every step reminded them of what they'd lost, not just a person, but the person. The one who kept the lights on and the wolves out. The main conference room was already full. Tom sat at the far end of the table, pale and twitchy, chewing the inside of his cheek like it owed him rent. Brenda wore a smile so tight it could have cut steel. And across from them sat Karen Wexler, VP of Operations, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else but too proud to admit it. No one said hello. I walked to the head of the table, opened my laptop, and plugged in the encrypted access drive I brought. The screen lit up with the master login terminal, clean, elegant, and locked. Tom shifted in his seat. Brenda folded her arms. Karen stared at me like she was bracing for impact. I typed slowly, deliberately, JESSIC, enter, a beat of silence. Then click. The screen melted open. System access restored, full administrative control. The keys to the kingdom, right back in the hands of the woman they tried to erase. I pulled up the back-end logs, confirmed nothing had been permanently damaged, and ran a diagnostic. All green. They'd been 2 clicks from total catastrophe, and I was the only one who could have stopped it. System stable, I said, flat and professional. Karen cleared her throat. We've also processed your documentation. Brenda slid a folder across the table like it was radioactive. Inside was the apology. Typed, signed, company letterhead and all. He acknowledged that Miss Jessica Lynn's termination was mishandled, and that her role in the architecture and maintenance of Trinix's digital infrastructure was both critical and foundational. We regret the circumstances of her departure and extend our formal apology. I didn't smile. I just tucked it into my bag next to the printed wire confirmation. And then I stood. Tom finally broke. That's it? You're just going to take the money and walk away. I looked at him for the first time that day. Looked through him, really? You already paid for the lock, I said. This was just the key, and I walked out, past the conference room, past the stunned faces, past the security guy who gave me a little salute like I'd just ended a war. Outside, the air smelled different. Not sweet, not fresh. Just clean. They thought they could replace me with acronyms and interns. But in the end, they didn't just have to admit they needed me. They had to pay for the privilege. They put a price tag on their disrespect. And it was high. I didn't just win. I salted the earth, and it felt like justice. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the coffee pot strikes again.